going to hell down here in Texas.
What the hell's going on, everybody? This is your boy Big Bad Bob with you for another episode of the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is episode number 215, I think, something like that. I don't know, getting senile in my old age. So this week we are going to be talking about James Powell, military intelligence from the 112th James Powell. Now this is the guy who just happened to make his way to Dealey Plaza, heard the shots, heard commotion, and people talking about where the shots came from, being the schoolbook depository. And he snapped the infamous Powell photograph of the schoolbook depository about 30 seconds after shots rang out in Dealey Plaza. But instead of immediately rushing in to the schoolbook depository where allegedly people said the shots came from, he followed everybody else to the grassy knoll area. Because this is where most people in Dealey Plaza thought that the shots had come from. And this is where he went first. Now, James Powell would eventually make his way to the schoolbook depository, but it wasn't because that's where he thought shots were coming from. But in fact, that's where he thought the nearest telephone would be, so he could call in and make a report to his superiors back at the 112th INTC group in Dallas, Texas. They were located in the Rio Grande building. He was eventually detained inside the schoolbook depository for about 45 minutes. He was not let go, not let out of the building, despite having identification and identifying himself as a special agent of military intelligence 112th group. Once they cleared him, then he was finally let go. They actually called his superiors to make sure this guy was legit before turning him loose. But he was held up inside the building for about 45 minutes after the assassination. He gave his statement, of course, that day, November 22nd, 1963, to I believe, the local Dallas Sheriff's Office. And he was also subsequently interviewed on January 3rd, 1964 by the FBI, which we'll get to. I believe he was interviewed by the Warren Commission. He was investigated by the HSCA, and then again during the ARRB. So let's get right to it. So what did James Powell, the reason I like doing this is because this arcs over, a 30-year period, basically a 35-year period. And we're going to look at how James Powell's statements have either stayed the same or moved a little bit one way or the other over that course of many years, and see if in fact he was there for, not just as he put it, he just happened to be there and wanted to see the president, He wasn't there in any kind of official capacity whatsoever. So let's take a look-see, shall we? So on November the 22nd, this is the statement that he gave. I, James W. Powell, special agent with the 112th INTC Group of 912 Rio Grande Building, Dallas, Texas, reside at 4049 Herschel Avenue. On November 22nd, 1963, at approximately 12:25 hours, I was standing at the corner of Austin and Main in Dallas, where I had just taken a picture of the late President John F. Kennedy and his wife as they passed by in the motorcade. Hoping to get one more picture, I ran 1 block back to Elm Street and down Elm towards the intersection of Elm and Houston. As I approached this intersection at approximately 12:28 hours and was about 1 block away, Kennedy's motorcade was just turning west off Houston Street. At this point, I heard at least 2 loud explosions, which I assumed could either have been shots from a firearm or some sort of fireworks. Several people in the crowd, which was at the intersection to view the motorcade as it passed, pointed up at the schoolbook depository building at 411 South Elm Street. I took a photograph of the building at that instant. Several policemen, men from the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, and newspaper and television reporters were rushing toward the railroad switching yard behind the schoolbook depository. I followed them in order to learn what had happened. One of the television reporters, whose name I did not get, said that he heard that someone had fired a gun at Kennedy. I rushed back to the schoolbook depository and went into the lobby and into the first floor offices. There, I overheard Pierce Allman, a newscaster for WFAA television in Dallas, who was telephoning his office. Allman said that he heard that Kennedy had been fired at and just talked with a construction worker who supposedly witnessed the event. I went upstairs to the second floor and telephoned my office. I reported what I had heard to Lieutenant Colonel Roy Pate, Region Commander. I then returned to the first floor, where I met and interviewed the aforementioned construction worker and employee of Wallace Beard Oil and Gas in Dallas. I did not have time to get the man's name because the Dallas police had to talk to him. I was able to learn from this man that he saw someone fire shots from approximately the 6th floor of the schoolbook depository and that one of the shots had hit Kennedy. This man said that Kennedy grabbed his chest and slumped forward as the motorcade continued towards Stemmons Freeway. Kennedy's wife, the man told me, had attempted to jump out of the car. This was all the information I was able to obtain from this source. I rushed to the same telephone I had previously used on the second floor and called my office to report this information. When I returned to the lobby of the schoolbook depository, I was met by policemen and men from the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, some of whom were carrying shotguns. I identified myself with my credentials, but, along with everyone else in the building, was detained. One of the law enforcement officers telephoned my office in order to further verify my identity. I gave them my name, the fact that I am a special agent with the United States Army Intelligence Corps, my business and home addresses, and my business and home telephone numbers. I was not allowed to leave the lobby of the building at that time, though. It was then approximately 1300 hours. I was released at 13:45 hours and returned to my office. So he was detained inside the schoolbook depository from 1 p.m. to 1:45 p.m. And of course, then he said he went back to his office. So that is his November 22nd, 1963 memorandum for the record. On January 3rd, 1964, he was interviewed by the FBI by Special Agent George Binney. James Powell, Special Agent, Region 2, 112th Intelligence, Army Intelligence Corps, 912 Rio Grande Building, advised that on November 22nd, 63, he had taken a photograph of the Texas School Book Depository and later turned this photograph in the form of a Kodachrome transparency over to Lieutenant Colonel E. Boyd, Region 2 of the Army Intelligence Corps in Dallas. Mr. Powell stated that the Kodachrome transparency was obtained from a photograph of the School Book Depository building, which was taken, to his best estimate, approximately 30 seconds following the shots fired at Kennedy. Powell was approximately 1/2 block east of the intersection of Elm and Houston, and the presidential motorcade had already turned west on Elm when he had heard the shots fired at the president. He then ran to the southeast corner of the Elm and Houston Street intersection, and seeing some people pointing to the School Book Depository building, he took the picture. To his best recollection, this picture was taken at 1/25th of a second at f11 with his Minolta 35mm camera set at infinity. Powell believes the film used Kodachrome X with ASA setting of 64. He had the film processed at the Cardinal Card and Camera Store in Dallas, Texas. Powell stated that he took the picture from across the street in a diagonal direction from the School Book Depository and estimated the distance as approximately 100 feet. Powell stated that upon development, the film disclosed the Texas School Book Depository, and on about the 5th floor, a Negro male was observed in one of the windows. Powell stated that he could not see anything otherwise significant in this picture. Powell stated he recalls having heard 2 shots fired and possibly a third. He recalls having questioned a man in the vicinity of the entrance of the School Book Depository. However, he did not obtain the man's identity, insomuch as the Dallas Police Department immediately took the man under control for questioning. Powell believes this man was a beer company employee. Not sure who he's referring to there. Seems certain he knows who that the other guy mentioned in his November 22nd report worked for the Beard Oil and Gas, or worked in the Beard Oil and Gas building in Dallas. That's a lot different from a beer company. So then we fast forward up to the HSCA, where he was interviewed on January the 12th, 1978 by agents Maxwell and Bastieri, where he now resides in Pacific Palisades, California. The list, his date of birth here is April of 1939, which would have made him 1 year younger than Oswald at the time of the shooting. So he'd have been about 23, roughly. Army intelligence. Said he's married with a couple kids, 2 kids. Say brown hair and I don't know what color eyes. 5'7", 155 pounds, white dude. He's now working at a manufacturer's representing 5 companies, all for Yale Industries, whatever that means. Sounds like a cover operation. So we'll go through his interview here. They asked him, "What time did you arrive at Dealey?" He says, "As the president's auto turned into Elm Street from Houston." "Why were you in the plaza?" "To view the motorcade." "Were you on duty and in uniform?" "No, I was not on duty, and I was in civilian clothes." "What was your position in the plaza when you snapped the photo?" "I was standing on the curb of the southwest corner of Elm and Houston Streets facing the School Book Depository." "When did you take the photo?" 20 to 30 seconds after the last shot I heard." "What caused you to look at the School Book Depository, and why snap a picture of it?" "A man standing in the crowd near me pointed to the building and stated the shots came from that building." "Did you take any other pictures, and how many?" "Yes, I took 4 other pictures, 3 at Love Field and 1 as the president's auto was several blocks prior to getting to the school book depository. I don't believe I have that photo as the picture came out extremely dark. What did you do after taking the picture of the school book depository? He says, I followed a crowd that was running towards the railroad tracks. One person in the group exclaimed that the shots had come from that direction. Did you know anyone in the plaza? No. Who was with you? I was alone. Did you know Ruby or Oswald? No. When you took the picture, did you see a figure in the window? Yes. Did you recognize the person? No. Did you see any object in this person's hands? No. Did you see any objects sticking out of the window? No. How long did this man stay in the window? I don't know, as I ran towards the railroad after taking the picture. Do you know anyone who had taken a picture of the depository at this time? No. Were you ever in the Dallas Police Headquarters? No. Type of camera used and lens. A Minolta rangefinder with a standard lens. Type of film used. Photochrom ASA 64. How long have you used this camera? A little over a year. When and where was the film developed? Sometime in 1963 in a camera shop near the Rio Grande building in Dallas. Have you ever been approached by any government agency regarding this color slide? Yes. Several months after I took the picture, the FBI picked up the slide and held it for several weeks. Were you told what success the FBI had with your color slide? Yes, I was informed by an agent. The man in the window on the 7th floor was identified and interviewed. Sorry, what? 7th floor. The man on the 7th floor was identified and interviewed. Never heard of this before, folks. Next up, we have the report prepared by Joseph Basteri and Albert Maxwell, the agents for the HSCA, concerning their interview with Powell. On this date, staff investigators Joseph Basteri and Albert Maxwell received from James Powell one transparent color slide of the school book depository. You know, folks, I say that name all the time. School book depository. And after I say it, I always question, did I just say suppository? Because to me, it sounds like I did. I don't know. If I did, I apologize. If I ever say suppository, uh, trust me, I know the difference between a suppository and a depository. Um, Sometimes I just don't know why I feel like it comes out as suppository. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's all in my head. I don't know. But I digress. Mr. Powell was then interviewed relative to his activities concerning the matter. Mr. Powell stated that on November 22nd, he was a soldier assigned to the 112th Military Intelligence Group stationed in Dallas. But because of the presidential motorcade, had received a day off. Okay? So all this proudy bullshit, hullabaloo, yada, 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 these military intelligence folks and other people were on high alert for the visit of the president is just fluff. So because the president was coming, he was given the day off. Or was he? Was he really undercover in the plaza? I don't know. Mr. Powell, who was alone at the time and in civilian clothes, said that he had just arrived at Dealey after having taken 3 photos of Kennedy's arrival at Love Airport. The 4th photo he took of the motorcade when it was several blocks away from the depository. He again ran ahead and positioned himself on the southeast corner of Elm and Houston, and arrived there when President Kennedy's car had just passed this location proceeding east on Elm Street. Suddenly, he heard 2 shots, and someone standing in the crowd pointed to the schoolbook depository, exclaiming the shots came in that direction. Mr. Powell then set his camera and took one picture of the building. From the time he heard the last shot to the time he snapped the picture, Mr. Powell estimated 20 to 30 seconds had elapsed. Mr. Powell advised that while taking this picture, he did observe a man looking out of the seventh floor window. Seventh floor window, folks. There wasn't supposed to be anybody on the seventh floor. He saw no object in this man's hands, nor did he see any object sticking out of any window. Powell then said he ran across the street and followed a group running towards the railroad tracks. He inquired as to why they were running in this direction, and one person replied that the shots came from this direction. Powell looked around, found nothing, so decided to enter the depository. Upon entering the building, he estimates that 10 to 12 minutes had gone by since hearing the shots. He ran up to the second floor and phoned his command and informed a major that President Kennedy had been shot. He said the major was not aware of the shooting yet. Mr. Powell then left the building and as yet had not seen any police officers in the building. Now, that's interesting because here recently I saw that it had been people had thought that they had found what's his face, Marion Baker, running into the building on a Darnell film, but it in fact has been recently debunked as being not being Marion Baker running into the building. So it's interesting that he had been in the school book deposit 10 to 12 minutes after the shooting. He still didn't see any police inside the school book depository building. That's interesting. He ran to the second floor and phoned his command and informed the major. Okay, yeah. Now then left the building and has yet not seen any officers in the building. As he was leaving the building, saw a man dressed in work clothes telling bystanders what direction the shots came from. Powell then identified himself to this person and began questioning. It was at this time that a police car arrived. An officer spoke to the man briefly and then ushered him into the car and sped off. Powell then again entered the building and called his command for the second time. This time he was stopped as he tried to leave the building. One of the officers then called his command, and a short time later, his superior officer arrived to verify Mr. Powell's identification. Okay, so this was not done over the phone. He had to wait until his superior officer arrived to verify Mr. Powell's identification. Interesting. Mr. Powell used a Minolta 35mm rangefinder with a standard lens to take the picture. He owned this camera for at least a year and had used Kodachrome ASA 64 film. He had the negative developed sometime in December of 63 in a camera shop located near the Rio Grande building in Dallas. Several months later, an FBI agent came to Powell's office and retrieved the color slide from him. After holding the color slide for several weeks, it was returned to Powell's office. Mr. Powell did not personally receive the slide and believes that it was either mailed or hand-delivered to his office. Shortly thereafter, Powell did receive a phone call from an agent thanking him for the slide. Powell then inquired as to what success they had had in viewing the slide. He was informed that they had located the man in the window that he had seen, and that the man had been interviewed by them, yet not identified. Powell remarked that no one in the 112th Military Intelligence Group was assigned to perform duty relative to the presidential motorcade, when instead most of them had received a day off. Mr. Powell enlisted in the Army in 1961 and was assigned to the 112th Military Intelligence Group. Although he had received from 8 to 10 weeks of training in the photography school at Fort Holabird, Baltimore, Maryland, his specific assignment was to investigate persons for military clearances. Powell was honorably discharged on August 31st, 1964. He is now married with 2 children and has been residing in the Los Angeles area since 1969. He is presently employed as a sales rep for Alavel Industries in Los Angeles, California. And that is where it was left during the HSCA investigation. Interesting, the seventh floor person. Now we are up, and in April of 1990, um, Timothy Ray, the chief analyst for military records, interviewed James Powell. Now we're going to interview a lot of it we've gone over. It's basic info, blah, blah, blah. Ray says, it's the 12th of April, 1996. I'm Timothy Ray, a member of the staff of Assassination Records Review Board, talking to James Powell about events surrounding the assassination of President. Let me begin being a couple of items of his career. And he asked him when he what he was doing, photographic training, blah blah blah. What kind of car he used. Now he's asked here. Ray says you had some kind of identification credentials, didn't you? Separate from your military ID card that identified you as a special agent. Powell says yes. Ray says, well, what did it look like? Powell said, well, it didn't show rank. It was a fold-out type of yes laugh. I guess Ray had whipped something out like this. His ARRB identification wallet showing owner's picture and employing federal. Powell says, well, something in your pocket like that. Exactly. Okay, so established that Powell did have a kind of flip open badge that he could flash that showed that he was a special agent in the 112th Intelligence Division. And that's important because, we talked a lot about the secret Knoll Agent, and people tried to say the Secret Service that people just were attributing him as a Secret Service agent. It was just how badge open and saying he's a special agent, which I don't buy. Because again, it wasn't like James Powell was, dressed in civilian clothes. I highly doubt that he was wearing a suit. So I just don't buy the fact that people mixed up the fact of special agent and Secret Service agent and attributed this to James Powell and the Knoll. So Ray says, let me show you this. You're familiar with this procedure? Powell says, yes. I should do that to begin with. Make sure I was talking to. Yes, we would do that. We would always identify these credentials. Like no rank or anything because we were talking with officers and it worked very effectively. We didn't carry sidearms or anything. We were trained to use 38s and rifles, but only year training, not to carry on a regular basis. We were strictly interviewing people. Ray says, I noticed one thing that after you were discharged from active duty, you were in the reserves for 3 years or something. Did you do any reserve training or were you just in the, standby? Powell said he was in inactive reserves just for the duration of my duty. And no, it wasn't necessary for us to attend meetings or anything like that. I could have been more active, but it wasn't mandatory. So I opted for not doing anything beyond just being available in case. You're still on call should something come up. You could be for that period of time. You could be called back in, but there were no meetings to attend or anything like that. It was strictly inactive reserves. Uh, in the files that I've been able to search, Ray says, I saw that immediately after the assassination, you wrote a memorandum, and you may have been interviewed by some FBI agents or something like that, but an indication that you were also interviewed by some people, I think, for the church committee. That was the Senate Committee on Intelligence in approximately 73, and later for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. You had a couple people talk to you. Is that correct? Powell says the HSC, I remember. The HSCA, remember. I don't, maybe the other one was on the phone. I don't remember a direct interview with them, but the House Select Committee people did come out here to Los Angeles, and I met with them in a hotel in downtown LA. A couple of gentlemen. They identified themselves, and I talked with them, and I got correspondence back from them, sort of confirming our meeting and so forth. Ray says, have you been contacted by researchers or people preparing books or anything like that? Hal says, not at all. They couldn't find me, and laughs. Ray says, laughing, you might think that's a good thing. I wonder why Hal didn't want to be found. He just says, yeah. Ray says, well, something that's not clear to me. Were you married at the time of the assassination? Hal says, no. But you were married. Hal says, yeah, shortly thereafter, he got married in 1964. And Ray says, let me now turn to the events around the 22nd of November 1963. Do you recall when or how you learned the president was going to visit Dallas? Hal says, to be honest with you, no. I'm sure, like anyone else, I read it in the paper or heard about it. It was interesting enough that I asked for time off, a leave of absence from my regular duty so I could see the motorcade, so I could go out to the airport and see the president. And I was hoping to get a few pictures. But I don't remember specifically how long before. I'd say in the neighborhood of a week, probably. Do you recall any discussion with other members of the 112th in anticipation of the presidential visit? Other people that were going to try to get time off to go see it, or anything else that anybody was going to be doing in connection with that, the visit? Powell says, to be very honest with you, no. That's surprising when I think about it. I know others were there. They were on duty, or they were working the normal things that they do and did not ask for time off to do this. Do you recall any discussion or activities the 112th was going to do related to providing security for the president? Hal says, no, not at all. Ray says, do you recall any occasion previous to that, or for that matter, subsequent to that, when the 112th did provide any kind of security, if not for the president, for any other uh, kind of activity? Hal says, we did not during my tenure there. Ray says, okay. Now, you mentioned that on the 22nd of November, you had asked for time off. I understand. I'm just clarifying something here. Some members of the unit were still, maybe most members of the unit were working that day. Is that correct? But you had specifically asked for time off. Powell says, right. Because if you're in my capacity, I'm expected to be out. I have leads that are given to me. When I'm given a lead, I'm expected to go out and interview references and look for records and that type of thing during the course of the day, and then file a report on each one of those. That's what the other agents were doing, except for those that there was always a staff in the building, in this case, the Rio Grande building. And there were probably 3 or 4 of those people there at the time when I had my time off. The other agents were just out doing their regular job. Ray says, well, let's go over here. Sort of what happened that day. Did you go? Do you recall whether you went to the office that day before you went to Love Field? I mean, you were on pass that day, so Powell says, no, I did not go into the office. So you went to Love Field? Were you there when the president initially arrived? Powell says, yes. Did you take pictures at the time? He says, yes. How many pictures? Not many, probably 3 or 4 as they came off the plane. And I was a pretty good distance away and unfortunately did not have a telescopic lens. You see these very small people coming off this great big plane, laughingly. And what happened then? After that, what happened? I can lick my finger and turn the damn page here. Powell says, well, I knew I wanted to get downtown. The motorcade route had been published in the paper, so you knew where the president was going to go. I went downtown, and I think, I'm trying to remember where I parked. If I'm not mistaken, I parked in the regular parking lot where we parked our government cars, which was near the Rio Grande building, and then walked a few short blocks away to where the motorcade was going to be coming down Elm Street. I was thinking myself there and waiting for the motorcade to come by. Ray says, you were driving your own car that day? Powell says, that's a good question. I honestly can't say. Probably was. Ray says, now can you tell me what happened here, the events in Dealey Plaza? First of all, let me ask you to do this. Can you show me? I'm going to show you a diagram here. If you could indicate on the diagram where you were when the shots were fired. Actually, we should turn it this way. North is now at the top. Here's Houston Street, and here's the depository, and here's Elm Street. Hal says, I know exactly where I was. He'd come down Main Street. Yeah, Main runs off the map over here, Ray says. Yeah, the motorcade came down Main, went right onto Houston, and left on Elm, and then down onto the freeway. When I took the pictures, I was back here. Again, honestly, I can't remember if these things were published the main streets, but it was one of these east-west streets. The motorcade was coming down. I was about a block away over here off the sketch. And once I went by, I was on Main because I went one block to Elm Street and I was coming down this way and I was almost at this intersection when the motorcade came around and started down Elm Street down the hill. I was probably half a block I was probably halfway down the block when I heard the shots fired. At that time, not expecting anything like that, you weren't sure if they were backfires or fireworks or actual gunshots. Obviously, it turns out that shots were fired. Says about 100 feet away from Elm and Houston. Ray says, oh, you were very close then, close enough that you can clearly hear the shots. Powell says, oh, yes. And did you have any sense at the time where the shots had come from? So, hold on a second. So this guy is military, former military, now in military intelligence. He was 100 feet away from the school book depository when shots were fired. Yet in his original memorandum, for the record, he states that he only heard 2 shots fired and that he didn't know the difference if they were fireworks, backfires, or gunshots. So how accurate of a witness is this guy, folks? Hal says, I knew that when I got to this intersection, there were people pointing up at the depository building, indicating they heard shots come from there. Ray says, if I could ask you, when you say people, you mean more than one person? Hal says, people, yes, more than one person, a couple. At least one pointed up at the building and another standing near that person. I think this gentleman corroborated that. I crossed the street over to the depository building and walked on down. There were police officers, a few police officers there that had just been around the area, plus some, at least a couple, from the sheriff's department that were there. Sheriffs. In group, we kind of went down to the parking area behind because there were, again, a lot of civilians standing around watching the motorcade come down who said they thought they heard someone running through that area. Notice he doesn't say shots coming from that area. He says they heard someone running through that area. So we all went together back there, but didn't see anything obvious other than just this stampede of people. Nobody carrying a gun or anything like that. So I left the group and went back to the depository building, it being the closest building that looked like it might have a phone in it, and went in there to call my office. Ray says, well, after taking your picture, when you went by the school book depository and went with policemen or sheriffs or whoever out toward the railroad yard, I guess, and back there, you said a moment ago, I understood you to say that somebody had said they'd heard someone running there. Is that your recollection? Powell says, yes, that's my recollection, that someone was running through there. But we all walked back through there and didn't see anybody at that point, so whoever might have was long gone. Do you recollect anyone saying they heard shots from that direction? Powell said, no, not really. That's possible. It's been a lot of years now, and I did not stay around at that. Reading and seeing what you hear now, there was that theory, but I have to say no right now. Ray says, okay, let me ask you this question. Were you carrying your special agent ID? Powell says, yes. Ray says, do you recall whether you showed that to anyone at the time you were walking around behind the schoolbook depository in the vicinity of the railroad yard? I mean, to stop and ask people anything. Did you show them that identification? Powell says, I recall that I basically recall that I did because the officers were curious as to why I was joining them, and I just flashed my credentials to show them, and that was sufficient at the time, and I put them back. I had my camera and so forth. We all sort of walked together back to that area behind the building, but then I left them in place. So Ray says, well, when you show somebody their credential, how would you identify yourself verbally? You'd say, and Powell says, well, I'd say, I'm Jim Powell, and I'm with the Military Intelligence Corps. Would you say you were a special agent? Yes. You would say that you were a special agent. Powell says, yes. Ray says, so you might have said something like, I'm James Powell. I'm a special agent with military intelligence, and show my credentials. It seemed like the logical thing to do at the time. It worked that time. It didn't work the second time. But anyway, when I was coming out of the building, but that's something else altogether. So apparently, when he showed his identification to people, he said, I'm James Powell, military intelligence. I'm a special agent with military intelligence. That sounds nothing like I'm a Secret Service agent. It did not give his name. So, and you're talking about police officers who are trained to remember details, uh, about things and be very explicit in their recall of events. So, are all these police officers and people that supposedly encountered the Secret Service agent on the Knoll misremembering things? All of them? I don't know. So then Ray starts talking to him about after he walked back to the schoolbook depository after searching the grassy knoll area or the parking lot behind there, or the railroad yard, or wherever he went. He says he went back to the depository building and went inside. Like he says, made a couple phone calls, yada yada yada. Um, he says they were pretty well convinced that something had happened directly from that building, and they wanted to make sure they got everybody who came out of there. So I showed them my credentials, and they took my credentials. They did not disbelieve me, but that was just their procedure. They took my credentials, they called my office, and I'd say within half hour, 45 minutes, Wilson Pate, came from my office, came down and identified me in person, and they let me go. Ray says, I recall, I think for your memorandum, you wrote on the 22nd that the second call that you made to your unit, I think you said you made it on the second floor, or maybe you made both of them on the second floor. I says, yeah, that's right. Did you ever go above the second floor in the depository? Powell says, no, I did not. Ray says, did you, some people have speculated that you assisted law enforcement authorities in searching the sixth floor. Did you do that? Powell says, no, sir. Were you involved in the discovery of the firearm found on the sixth floor, or any of the cartridges or anything like that? Powell says, not at all. Remember, the second time I went in there, I made the phone call and came back downstairs again. At that time, I was confronted by the authorities and was not allowed to leave out of that area. I was in the, what do you call it, the entranceway to where the stairs were right behind me, like sort of a well there. Excuse me, and there were probably 4 or 5 of us in there that were detained and not allowed to go anywhere else in the building or outside the building for a period of time. So basically, there's only 4 or 5 people detained inside the building at this point. Now, a half an hour to an hour and a half after the assassination. But for 10 or 12 minutes, at least, maybe 15 after the shots, there was no police presence in the school book depository to speak of. That means preventing people from coming in or going out. So why at this point, 15 minutes later, you think that the alleged assassin is still inside the building and hadn't got out yet is ridiculous. But okay. Top notch DPD, buddy. And the other people that were there, do you recall any discussion or speculation that they had about what happened? What they might have said? Powell says, well, other than we all knew the president had been shot and we didn't know his status at the time. Because remember, we were cut off from anything. This has happened and he had been shot, and that's what he was being recounted all over the place, but nobody had heard a radio or anything official. So until we all got home and with our friends or whatever, or had access to a TV or radio, we didn't know exactly what had happened. Now, my speculation, your speculation, is that the other 4 or 5 people who were detained uh, with James Powell would have been the folks that we saw removed from the depository and transported to Dallas Police Headquarters in the back of a squad car. This including Billy Lovelady, Doherty, Bonnie Ray Williams, Bill Shelley. That's it. That would be my guess as to who was detained in there with James Powell, just because they were taken, out of the building and directly into a squad car and transported to the DPD. And at that point, as they were transported down, uh, Powell was cut loose. And says, now Wilson Pate from your unit came, and Powell says, no, it's Page. So Wilson Page, Ray says, Page, I'm sorry, got you released. And where'd you go then? Did you go home? Did you go back to your office? He says, I'm pretty sure I went back to the office. I went to the office with him briefly because that was there that I did the report. I wanted to put that together while it was fresh in my mind, and I went home after that. So his memorandum for the record on November 22nd was done in the military intelligence offices there in Dallas, not for the sheriff's office or the DPD. My bad. He says, do you recall during the time that you were in Dealey, except for Wilson Page, did you see anyone? Do you recall seeing anyone else from the 112th? Powell says, no. Do you recall whether on the day of the assassination, back at the unit, whether anyone else from the 112th either talked like or prepared a report indicating that they may have been a witness to these events? Powell says, no. They were as surprised to hear it as I was to have more or less witnessed it. The first time I called them, nobody from the colonel on down believed that it really happened because you must be kidding or something. Ray said, do you recall after the assassination, this was not just on the 22nd, but even for days or weeks afterward, any scuttlebutt, anything about Lee Harvey Oswald, whether he was really the assassin or not, or anything like that. Sorry, folks, my finger licker is not working. He says, other than normal conversations about theories about what had happened, was he really the person that did it? This was all prior to his getting shot by Ruby. We were as much in the dark as everybody else. We've all got our own theories. Anyway, it was just as information developed, we became more knowledgeable. Let us know what was going on. And again, there was no scuttlebutt, so to speak. He says, do you recall hearing anyone talk about the fact that the 112th either had or might have had a personality file on Lee Harvey Oswald? Powell says, no. When you heard the shots back in Dealey Plaza, what was your impression of how many shots there were? Powell says, my impression was an issue of 2 shots, possibly 3. Look, folks, there's no possibly 3. It was either 2 or 3. Did you hear 2 or did you hear 3? Again, it's this thing. If you're not listening for it, you're not sure. But at the same time, we were trained to be very observant and so forth. So the more I think about it and talk about it after then, I can recall 2 shots fairly quickly together, then a pause, and then a third or explosion. Again, at that time, I didn't realize they were gunshots. You don't want to hear gunshots in a situation like that. You want it to be something else altogether. So it's hard, a little difficult to really register until I got up there and heard what had happened and realized these were gunshots. So he's saying he heard 2 shots fairly quickly together, then a pause, and then a third. Well, everybody else that was there that day stated that there was a shot, and then a pause, and then 2 shots fairly quickly together, like bang, bang, bang. But Powell's saying he heard bang, bang, bang. Odd. He says, did you have any sense of the direction which the shots had come from? Powell says, no way to know that. Because from my perspective, when I heard it, I wasn't in Dealey Plaza itself. I was approaching the plaza. It's very open. Things can echo around in there, and there's no way of knowing exactly the direction they came from. So until I got there and saw someone point up to the building, I had no way of knowing. Ray says, do you recall, either from the afternoon of the assassination or later days, any follow-up activities by the 112th to cooperate with law enforcement agencies, or did the unit do anything to help the investigation? Powell said specifically no, other than my own contact with well, I don't really recall if it was the FBI. Yeah, it was. We did contact federal authorities, as I recall, to let them know that I'd been there and I was filling this report, and they told me where to send the report and so forth. Then were you interviewed by the FBI? He says, I don't recall being interviewed by the FBI, as strange as that may seem, yet, folks, at the beginning of the show, I read you the interview. So for somebody trained to remember details, he seemed to have forgotten that one. Skipping forward through here, talking about his pictures, yada yada yada. And then Ray asked him a very interesting question. Do you recall members of the 112th investigating reports of some weapon thefts from nearby bases? And Powell says, I can't honestly answer that. Again, I had no part in that, and I can't speak for something that might have happened higher up than me or that I didn't know about. It's possible, but I honestly don't know one way or the other. Ray said, well, records from the 112th indicate that one of the other things they were involved in, sort of a domestic surveillance, had to do with surveillance of civil rights activists. Do you recall participating in anything like that? Powell says, no, not at all. Ray said, well, in the normal course of your duties, you mentioned that you sometimes dealt with local law enforcement officials. Do you recall talking to any of them after the assassination, when you would meet them in subsequent days or weeks in the normal course of your duties, talking about what had happened in the assassination? And Powell says, not specifically, no. Ray said, do you recall any activities that you or other members of the 112th did after the assassination that you would recollect as being related to the assassination in terms of an investigation or follow-up or scuttlebutt or anything like that? Powell says, no. To my knowledge, none of the other members of my group viewed the motorcade or were down there or anything. I was the only one. And other than just normal exchange of my thoughts and views on it, that's about as far as it went. Ray said, well, did you ever talk to did anyone ever talk to you or give you any instructions about not talking about what you saw in Dealey? Powell said, no. Or in changing your story in any way? Powell said, no, not at all. Ray said, last item here. Powell said, I was hoping, ha ha ha. Let me throw a couple of names at you and see if these names ring any bells. Did you ever know an FBI agent named James Hosty? Hosty. He would have been, I think, an FBI agent who worked in the Dallas office. Powell says, for some reason the name sounds familiar, but I can't place him, unless he was maybe someone I had spoken with concerning this. But my mind is just very vague on that right now, so I can't deny that, but I can't agree with it. It's possible. Okay, do you recall a name? This would probably have been someone from local law enforcement named Jack Revel or Revo. Powell says, this is interesting. I'll again be very candid with you. I don't recollect the name. And why is it interesting? That was the DPD's contact to the 112th. That's where they got all their info from about Lee Harvey Oswald through Rebel. Okay, let me ask you one more thing, Ray said. Is there anything else that you recollect about the assassination or the events afterward or before that for some reason somebody hasn't asked you about or hasn't touched on, or that you'd like to say to complete the record? Powell says, no, frankly, nothing at all. If anything comes to mind, I'll let you know. Don't call me, I'll call you. All right. So, yeah, interesting stuff there, folks. Interesting stuff. Now, after the interview, Ray kind of put together some additional notes. It says, in a lunch conversation before our taped interview, Mr. Powell stated that he did not recall a person assigned to Region 2 in Dallas of the 112th INTC named Edward Coyle. On reviewing his own emergency notification roster from that unit, Mr. Powell noted that Coyle is listed as being the resident agent assigned to the Abilene office, a one-person substation of the Dallas office. He suggested this possibly explains why he has no clear recollection of Coyle, since, at least in July of 62, when the roster is dated, Coyle did not work in Dallas. Number two, following the taped interview, Powell provided Ray with original copies of the following documents. 2 copies of the 112th Special Orders, number 121, dated 3 August 64, orders reassigning Powell, preparatory to discharge from the Army. A memo dated May 6, 63. Orders assigning Powell to 45 days temp duty at Fort Holabird, Maryland, to attend investigative photography course. A couple other just personal documents. Number 3, Mr. Ray discussed with Mr. Powell the desirability of providing any relevant original records, notes, or photos in his possession to the National Archives JFK collection. Mr. Ray promised to provide Mr. Powell specific information about completing a deed of gift for any such items in future correspondence. Ray also promised Powell an opportunity to review the verbatim transcript of their interview and to make any additions or corrections he might wish prior to his being deposited in the archives. So there you have it, folks. That's the ARRB interview with James Powell. And you see where they were trying to either prove or disprove. And lone nutters will point to the fact that, oh, yeah, he was showing his badge around on the grassy knoll. This is the guy that people mistook for a Secret Service agent. Blah blah blah. Well, folks, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. And I'm also not buying the fact that this guy was there on accident. He could have been anywhere in Dallas, anywhere along that motorcade route, but he just happened to be standing 100 feet in front of the school book depository when the shots rang out that killed the president. And this guy happened to be in Photographic Investigation Division of Military Intelligence Branch in Dallas, Texas at the time. My guess is someone may have known and tipped them off to try to capture a picture of Oswald or somebody that vaguely looked like Oswald, trying to capture them in the 6th floor window. But I don't know. I'm just being a conspiracy theorist here. Who knows? So after this was all done on April 26, 1996, Timothy Ray sent James Powell a letter basically thanking him and going over everything and uh, trying to convince him to donate his things to the archives. He says donating these items to the National Archives has two important benefits. First, the archives will take special care to preserve these items in perpetuity. They will not only prevent them from being lost, they will also keep them from further deteriorating with age. Second, by placing them in the archives, you will ensure that they will be freely available to everyone from scholars to schoolchildren who want to see them in the future. The Kennedy Assassination Collection is already one of the most popular collections in the archives, and by placing your items there, they will be seen by generations of people, side by side with other relevant materials from the assassination. And they will do it for free. Unlike many private collections, National Archives holdings are open to all without charge. As I told you, I would not ask you to part with something of significant sentimental value to you, but let me suggest this. Without cost, the National Archives will provide you state-of-the-art, high-quality prints of your November 22nd photos in return for the original slides. Similarly, they will provide you high-quality bond reproductions of any documents you choose to donate. It seems to me that this would satisfy your interest in having something to show your grandchildren, accompanied, if you desire, by a document certifying that the originals are in the James W. Powell records and the Archives Kennedy Assassination Collection, while at the same time ensuring the preservation and availability of the originals for posterity. Please think about this. Sincerely, Timothy Ray. Timothy Ray. Well, that's it, folks, for this one. I do know that the other photos, the other 4 photos that he took that day, did not get turned over to the archives. I'm not sure about the slide. That's still iffy. But I do know the other 4 did not make it in. So, if anybody knows if the schoolbook depository slide from Powell made it, let me know. I'd be interested to know. But that's it for this one. And make sure you're following along on Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7, folks. And make sure you head over to the YouTube page, the Lone Gunman Podcast, and make sure you subscribe, like, and even get notified when a new episode drops. Feel free to comment. I would appreciate it greatly. And make sure you're listening to Quick Hits, a JFK assassination news and notes podcast that I do with my good buddy Doug, the host of the Dallas Action Podcast. And together, we are a dynamic duo that cannot be topped or stopped, baby. And that is 100. Anyway, that's it for this week, folks. And in fact, look for Quick Hits to drop very soon. We love you. Until next time, folks, stay safe out there. Peace.